What's up guys, it's Ashley, and this morning a customer brought me an antelope. I'm going to be showing you how to skin off an antelope head, but it's pretty much the same exact process for any kind of horned or antlered game. It's going to be a little bit different around the horns here because they are just different than antlers, but it's pretty much the same process. The eyes are the same, nose, mouth, ears, that's all the same. Taxidermists have to know how to do this in order to do mammal taxidermy. But hunters, it's also really good to know how to do this process too. Sometimes you can't get the animal to the taxidermist in time. Maybe you're just skinning it out for €1. It's also good to know how to do this for that process as well. Maybe you're not getting something mounted, but your friend is, and you're able to help them out. If you're crossing state lines and they require you to have the animal skinned out, you got to know how to do this too. There's a few different things that you can't mess up if you want to be able to use this skin for taxidermy. Most people, when they bring in an animal to get mounted, it's just like this. The head is not skinned out. This is how I prefer it. The customer has skinned the shoulders off the body and cut it with enough cape in order to do a shoulder mount, but they left the head intact. I think there's a little bit of neck meat here, but that's not bad. This is a good cut. As a taxidermist, I like to be able to skin the hide off the head myself. To me, that just ensures that it's going to be done correctly. Not that the hunter or whoever won't do it correctly, but it's just something that I can keep in my own hands and make sure it's done correctly. To me, I would say that this process is called caping, like I'm caping the animal off the head. I know to some people caping means to get it to this step where it's caped off the body already. I think that's a little bit of a subjective terminology there. So I'm just going to be skinning the hide off the head. I'm just going to use that terminology. The tools that I'm using today, I got gloves on. You don't need gloves, I just like them. To do this skinning, I'm using a scalpel. It's a number 3 scalpel and number 11 blades. This is my preferred scalpel and blade. Any sharp knife will do. I do highly recommend using some kind of scalpel or knife that's like a, what do you call it? Like a single-use knife with blades that you can take on and off and get a new one. I'm also going to be using a sawzall or reciprocating saw. Now we're going to jump right into it. So first thing I'm going to do is put a new blade on. When I skin off a head, I like doing the mouth and the nose first and then jumping back to the back of the head. This is just my preference. You don't have to do it like this, but to me, I find this to be the easiest way and just the way that I like to do it. I'm going to pull the skin away from the teeth, and then as you can see, here's the front teeth. Here's the hairline, and what I'm going to do is cut as close to the lower jawbone as I can. I want to keep as much of this papillae and inner mouth skin as possible. I'm going to make a cut right here. On the bottom teeth, same thing. You can feel where the bottom of that bone is. And I'm just cutting right along the bone. Same thing on this side. The first few times you do this, try to keep your knife really close to the bone, as close as possible. That helps prevent putting any holes in the hide. So throughout this whole process, we never want to put any holes in the hide, in the skin side. Holes do happen. I put a hole in the face every now and then, but it is really important not to put holes in the hide. Then you got to sew them up later, and they may or may not look right later. So it's really, really important not to put any holes in the hide if you can help it. As a general skinning tip, it's helpful to keep some tension on the hide and keep that skin taut so when you cut it, it exposes the membranes that you need to cut. So this is what I have so far. These little things inside the mouth here, I mentioned it earlier, but they're called papillae, and these are really important to keep on the skin side In taxidermy, we use this inner mouth skin, so that really needs to remain on there. Don't cut it off. Make sure you leave plenty. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the top jaw. So this upper part here where the nose hits the top of the mouth, that part we're going to want to make sure to skin it a certain way. So let me show you a little more detail on that. So this nose has a bunch of cartilage in it, right? And when I skin this, I want to keep my knife as close to the bone here, and you can feel that with your fingers. You'll notice you're going to start cutting through cartilage, not just skin. Eventually you are going to cut into the nasal cavity, and that's okay. You have to. But it's important to leave as much of this nose skin as possible. You'll feel the bone right here. It's going to start curving upward. And where the bone curves upward, you can also start slicing through that cartilage. This part can be a little tricky, and it's really easy to put a hole in the skin. Again, here's the bone. I'm sticking my knife as close to the bone as I can. I've skinned out hundreds of heads. I probably don't need to cut so close to the bone, but it is super helpful to cut close to the bone if you've never done this before, because it is way more important not to put a hole in the hide than to have too much meat still on the hide. So like I said, I start at the front, I do the mouth and the nose, and then I go back to the back of the head. So this is about as far as I go down when I'm skinning from the front. I didn't even skin out the mouth all the way. I left some of the papillae still connected back here, but I just want to get a good start. If you're just skinning from the back of the head forward, in my opinion, it's a lot easier to make holes in the areas like on the lower jaw and around the nose, because the skin is just a little bit thinner and it may be hard to see where you're at. And so this is just the way that I like to do it, and I think it's a really good way to do it. But again, you don't have to do it this way. So now I'm just going to put that back together momentarily. I'm going to shift focus to the back of the head. There's a bunch of different cuts that you can use to skin the back of the head. So I'm trying to decide which one that I want to do. On deer, I normally do a T-cut, or I just do a burr-to-burr cut. If you want to see how I do a burr-to-burr incision, I have a video on that. You can check that out now. These antelope have such crazy hair patterns back here. I don't really want to cut through that. So I'm actually going to do on this one what's called a 7 cut, where I'm going to cut from burr to burr or horn to horn, and then instead of going straight down the middle, I'm going to cut from one horn, and I'm going to angle and then go back. So I'll show you what that looks like. The top of the 7 is the cut from the horn to horn, then from one horn to the middle diagonally, and then back down the spine. The way that I'm going to start the cut is I'm going to take my scalpel and I'm going to turn it so it's kind of upside down. I'm going to find the line where the horn stops and the skin begins. It's usually right here where there's hairline, but not always, because pronghorn grow hair like up into their horn. So if I were to cut all the way up there, that wouldn't work. I'm gonna poke a hole and then make sure my blade is facing up. So now I cut all the way across. Let me show you what that looks like. Right there is where I started, and then I cut across to this horn. If I was doing a vertebrate, that would be the only incision I'd make. On this next cut, I'm going to cut about, I don't know, ½ inch, an inch away from the first cut here. I'm going to come down and then straight down the middle. So now I've got my initial cut, the top of the 7. Now the continuation of my 7 cut. What I'm going to do next is start cutting around the horns. Antelope or pronghorn horns, they are the craziest thing because they actually shed these horn sheaths every year. The new horn grows underneath them and then they pop this one off. They are the craziest, most fascinating animal, I swear. They're not like deer and elk where you can obviously see where the antler stops and the hair and skin begin. This is just not as obvious. So for pronghorn, you can feel where this horn is really firm and then all of a sudden it's soft, and that's where you want to cut. On pronghorn, it's okay to leave a little tiny bit of that horn sheath connected to the skin, and it's also okay to leave a little bit of hair connected to the horn sheath. So here's what we're working with so far. So as you can see, there's some hairs still connected to this horn sheath, and that's okay. These horns are actually made of keratin, which is the same material that makes up the hair. And here's just a few more close-ups of what I'm looking for. I really just want a clean cut, like no jagged edges. Here I'm just working on skinning more of the head and working my way to the other horn so I can start releasing the skin from that horn as well. Throughout this whole process, I kind of jump around a lot. Like I won't fully skin around the horn and then jump to the other horn and then go to an eye. Like I'll kind of do a little bit here and there. Sometimes that's necessary so you can release some tension, so that way you're not fighting the skin and you can skin it out more efficiently. Now I got the skin totally released from around the horns. No more skin is touching the bottom of the horns. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to release the ear butts and then get some of this neck skinned out. So here's the back of the ear here. These ears, they're made of cartilage and they got a little ear butt that sits deep into the skull. There's a lot of meat and stuff back here. If you feel around back here, you can feel where the back of the skull is. And the earbuds are going to set in there. So again, like I've been saying this whole time, take your scalpel and cut as close to the bone as possible. So as I was cutting, I was looking for the bottom of that ear butt, and you can see it right there. I cut through the cartilage. There's the back of the horn, the back of the head. I cut straight through here, and then I cut through the ear butt. When you skin out animals, you have to cut through the ear butt, but what I like to do is cut as deep as possible. This ear butt hole, where I cut through the cartilage, it's smaller than like a dime sized. And that's what I try to do. Anything smaller than like a dime or a nickel, that's a good deep cut. I'm going to cut a little bit deeper on this side, on this ear, and then I'm going to switch to the other ear. Again, I'm just slicing as close to that skull as I can until I finally find the little piece of cartilage right here, and I'm going to slice through it. Then I'm going to just continue skinning off the hide off the back of the head. Also, to be clear, I didn't make my 7 cut incision all the way down the back, down the whole length of the spine. I stopped right at where this neck meat stops. Okay, before I get too far, I want to show you how to do the eyes. And the eyes are probably the most important part of skinning the head to get correct. These eyes on an antelope, they are nearly directly under the horn. They are so close. You can physically feel the orbital bone right here. Like I said, it's so important. You want to keep your knife as close to the bone as possible. Before I get too far, what I want to do is I'm going to stick my finger or my thumb inside of this eye. And then pinch it. So that way you're protecting the black eye ring here and you're not going to cut through that. That is so important not to cut. It just ensures that you're not going to cut that because you're not going to cut your finger. So again, there's the bone. I'm going to cut along the bone. I'm pulling this tight with my index finger and my thumb. And that's my finger right there. My finger's well within this eye. I feel comfortable that I can slice right here away from the bone. Doing this gently. So now I can really see what I'm working with on the underside of the skin. Be really careful and not pop the eyeball either. If you pop the eyeball, like if you accidentally cut it, it's just a little messy. Another really important part right here in the front of the eye, this little thing here, it's called the caruncle. It's this little tiny triangle part right here. I'll see if I can zoom in. This little triangle part right here. This is what's called the caruncle, and you do not want to cut that. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it is really important. This is what can make a cape a competition quality cape and just an average cape, is how intact little details like that are. What I'm going to do to ensure that I don't cut that is just go slow and be really gentle about it. Side note, this little skin right here, this is called the nictitating membrane, or sometimes it's called the third eyelid. Some people like leaving this on the cape. You could actually use this when you mount the deer, but I like just recreating this, and so I don't salvage the original one. So when I skin it off, I'm just gonna cut it off, but if you wanted to leave that intact, you could leave it still attached to the skin and instead cut underneath it. But since I'm not going to include it on this cape, I'm just gonna cut on this side of it, if that makes sense. Check it out, here's that little caruncle right there. And I'm cutting really deep here, following the bone. And this bone right here, it doesn't fully connect like in a perfect circle. It goes from about here to about here. And in between these 2 points, there's just a little divot. If you ever look at a skull that's cleaned, you know what I'm talking about. As you can see, I'm leaving a lot of that inner eye skin attached to the hide. And that's what you want to do. You want to leave as much of this as possible. Before I mount the animal, I will go through and cut it a lot smaller, but some taxidermists like to have a longer piece of inner skin on the eye here. It's kind of a preference thing, but it's always better to leave it longer so that you don't cut it too short. Another cool thing on pronghorn is that they don't have a preorbital gland like deer and elk do. If you've ever skinned out a deer or elk, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's called a tear duct. I call it a tear duct sometimes, but it is the preorbital gland. Antelopes do not have a big one. I mean, they probably have something similar, but either way, they don't have a big one. So that's something you don't have to worry about on pronghorn, and that's something that makes them different from deer and elk.
Now I'm going to move on to the other eye. I'm going to speed this one up a little bit, but again, I'm going to start slicing it and then make sure my finger is inside that eye here so that I do not cut that black rim around the eye. That's super important. I do this every time. Like, there's a lot of things that maybe I do a little bit more of a shortcut anymore, but this I always do on every single animal that I cape.
So check it out, almost done. Got both eyes really skinned out. Now I'm just gonna work my way forward and meet up with the cuts that I made on the mouth.
I didn't capture it every time, but this is my third blade that I'm using on this head. I use about 1 to 3 scalpel blades on every head that I cape out. They're cheap, and it's so important to have a sharp blade that when you start struggling to cut pieces, it's time to change the blade.
Okay, on the front here, my cut is somewhere in here, and I'm gonna meet up with it in the back. Remember I said earlier, you wanna keep as much inner mouth skin as possible and papillae. So again, I'm just gonna put my finger through the back of the mouth here and kind of feel where I wanna cut. There's my finger right there. So
after I connect to my 2 cuts in the mouth, then it's just a matter of simply skinning out the head. This part is easy from here on out. You just gotta skin the rest of the head like you would any other part of the body. Like I was saying earlier, it's so important to have a sharp knife. When your knife is dull, it's actually a lot easier to put holes in the hide because you're having to use a lot more force to cut, and then you could slip or you could just put too much force and accidentally put holes in the hide. So I just wanted to say that part again because having a sharp knife is so important, and if you're struggling at all with skinning out animals, ensuring that you have a really sharp knife might be a game changer for you. Maybe I'm just speaking from my experience because I know I used to just not really think it was that important, but it is so important, and it really is a game changer and makes things so much easier. And with that, here is the final cut.
all right, and we are almost done. I set the cape over just to the side for a second, and I'll show you a little more details about that later. However, I am just going to take care of this real quick.
Before I cut into the skull, I'm just going to cut away some of this meat just to make the cutting a little bit easier.
So basically, this is how to skull cap an antelope. If you're doing a European mount, then it's already skinned out, you're good to go. But if you're getting this mounted from a taxidermist, or if you are a taxidermist, then you don't need all this stuff. You just need the skull cap. Alright, so the skull cap is basically all I need for taxidermy purposes. I'm going to make a cut behind the horns and in front of the horns. I'll show you how that works.
Now that I have the skull cap removed, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time getting some of this meat and membrane off of the skull cap. I'm not going to worry about doing a super detailed job, but I do just want to get the majority of the stuff off that I can just with a scalpel.
All right, now this pronghorn is totally skull capped. Still has a lot of meat and membrane on it. But that's about how I like to leave it for now. And when I go to mount this thing, I will cut this a little more and make a little more precise cut, but this is great for now. Quick note on pronghorn. These horn sheaths have to be removed, totally removed, and cleaned up underneath in order for this to be totally clean. So that's true for European mounts and for taxidermy mounts. You have to remove both these sheaths, clean up, and then glue them back on. And that is a completely clean skull cap for pronghorn and any horned animals actually. You don't have to do that for antlered game. So because I still have to take these horn sheaths off, I'm not gonna do that right now. I'm just gonna do that later on, like when I get closer to actually mounting this antelope. So for now, I'm just gonna put a little bag over the skull cap and I'm just gonna put this in the freezer. It's gonna live there for a little while. All right, and here is the skinned out pronghorn cape. So we left a lot of inner mouth skin intact, all that papillae, a lot of inner eye skin, ear butts cut really deep, about the size of a dime, and plenty of cape to work with. However, I can't take credit for that part. Pronghorn can be super susceptible to slippage. What I'm gonna do with the cape, instead of rolling it up in a bag and putting it into the freezer, I'm gonna put this in the freezer. However, I'm gonna lay it out flat, just like this, in the open air of the freezer. I wanna let this cape cool down, get really cold, and then after a little while, maybe 30 minutes to an hour, a little bit more, then I will roll it up, put it in a bag, and then put it back in the freezer. The reason I'm doing that, instead of rolling it up like this, is that if I were to just roll it up and put it straight in the freezer, there's gonna be pockets in here where this skin, it's still kind of warm. Because when you get warm pockets like this takes so much longer to freeze, and that's where you can really get some slippage spots if you tuck stuff in when it's warm or if it doesn't have a chance to cool down very quickly. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna put the skull cap in the freezer also. Oh, and there you go. That's how you skin out a pronghorn antelope for taxidermy. Let me know what you think about this video by leaving some comments, or if you have any other questions that you want me to answer, please leave them down below as well. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe and all that jazz. Thank you guys so much for watching.